Okay, welcome to the Whistler Design Review. So I'm going to talk to you about the security enhancements we are doing in the Whistler timeframe. I may throw in a little bit of tidbits about what we are planning to do in terms of something beyond Whistler, because some of the areas in security are pretty wide, and it takes us a couple of dev cycles to actually get through the features. So my name is Praerit Garg. I'm the lead program manager in one of the areas of security. And while I will not just talk about my area, I'll talk about all the areas of security that we are going to enhance with Whistler. I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, we just got Windows 2000, and there's so much security stuff in it, and now you're going to tell me about what's beyond. Well, some of you are thinking, well, I hope he got my message, and I'm going to get the feature that I was looking for. So I hope we'll get a combination of both of those, and I'll get some feedback as part of the questions later to see what we missed. When we were doing the design review for Whistler and for Blackcomb, which is subsequent to Whistler, we wanted to decide some themes around which we wanted to build our features. That helped us organize our feature sets. So one of the first things that I'll do is tell you about the beyond Windows 2000 themes that we are focusing our features on. And the rest of the topics you notice are pretty much all of security. We are making enhancements in all the areas of security, whether it's authentication, data protection, management of security, applications and access control, or PKI deployment. And then the common criteria evaluation, which is not really a feature, but sort of a ratification of our security design with an external body, the United States government, as well as actually the external governments. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the themes for the Whistler, as well as beyond Whistler a little bit. So when we look at the features for security, we sort of categorize them in around three axes. The end user axis, which is the axis of how we can simplify security for our end users. The administrator axis, which is the axis where we look at how we can make security easy to manage for administrators. And then the third axis is the developer axis, to enable developers to actually integrate with our security infrastructure and build applications which leverage the security framework that we have built into the platform. And these three axes are really what drive various themes and various capabilities that we build in the operating system. So clearly, one of the themes was to build on the Windows 2000 platform. We have rich security infrastructure already in the platform now, and we just need to enhance it to solve some of the particular critical end customer scenarios. The first and the foremost in that space is the end user security experience. Be it dealing with passwords, having multiple accounts, and things like that. The end user security experience is one of the foremost things that we are working on to simplify. And if you look at the end user experience, that is actually heart of how secure your environment is. How many passwords do people have to remember? How many times do they have to log on? And things like those, which actually sort of hinge your security infrastructure and the security of, or the strength of the security of your infrastructure. The second is enabling applications to leverage a highly flexible and a high performance authorization system so that from the perspective of the user as well as administrator, they see a common access model. They see a common security model that is not just leveraged by the platform, but is also leveraged by the applications. So when I go and set up ACLs, I set up ACLs same way I set up on files, I set up on some other application. And that is an application or a developer-driven theme. The third one is continuing to improve the security management and monitoring. That is along the administration theme to say that what can we do? We have done some work in group policy so that you can actually manage security across thousands of machines. Where can we take it next so that you actually can do it even more simpler, right? You can set up different application server roles that you have and configure them with respect to security. And then lastly, to enable large-scale public key deployment. So like I said, the first and the foremost thing was the end user experience. Now, the end user experience comes from two aspects. One is just because our security infrastructure hinges a lot on what the user experience is. The second is one of the big themes of Whistler is the consumer platform. So as we build the consumer platform, we decided that the end user security experience is crucial to simplify. So we are going to do, and we are doing significant updates to our user security model in order to enable users to log on once and yet have access to multiple accounts, be it intranet accounts or internet accounts, and transparently be able to support that, as well as ability to manage your documents on the system, both secure in terms of ACLs or in terms of encryption, and be able to share them and able to define in a very simplified way who you want to share your documents with. So, and then the third is bringing in the personal firewall with stateful inspection by default. This is the realization that a home machine is now going to be on the internet, be it the DSL or cable modem technologies. The internet is coming right into people's homes. And with that, it is important that when they upgrade to a Whistler machine or they buy a Whistler system, they can feel secure from the internet attacks that are coming in. And this personal firewall, which is configured to be secure out of the box, will enable that capability. The user logon I've already talked about. We are building a user interface which is much more simplified and much more personalized for the consumer space, as well as enables an integrated authentication to multiple services. The administrator account has, in the enterprises, been one of the biggest problem. Okay, there is a local administrator account in every system, and that tends to be a security vulnerability from the perspective of large enterprises. We have had requests, how can we get rid of that account, or how can we disable that account? And typically you get into a lot of concerns that, oh, if you disable that account, how are you going to actually get access to the machine back if you forgot the password and things like that. So one of the things we are doing is we are moving the administrator account to the safe mode only, so that it's actually used to get the system back. It's not really the default account. One of the reasons is just the personalization for the consumer space. The administrator doesn't sound like a very interesting name. The second is, of course, you want to make that account as safe as possible so that it's only available for physical access to the machine rather than available for attack over the internet. There is a new users and passwords applet which will enable configuring multiple credentials on a per user basis. So you can actually, so the system can harvest different credentials, be it for e-commerce sites or be it for, say, in an enterprise, multiple services which are enabled through different systems or different accounts. So you can actually configure them and have the system automatically use the right account and right credentials when you go and access those services. Several of these pieces of functionality actually gets provided by a feature, what we call is a credential manager. And the initiative to provide credential manager is really to provide what we call an end user single sign-on experience. Single sign-on experience or single sign-on is a term that gets used a lot, and it means a lot different things to different people. So that is why I qualify the term single sign-on with an end user single sign-on, which is to say, from a user's perspective, there is a single sign-on happening, even though the system might have multiple credentials being used under the covers transparently, which are getting updated and they're secure and they're strong and things like that. So the biggest and the foremost thing is a simplified user logon experience. So you log on once and a lot of services get enabled to you, even though they are available via different accounts and different credentials. And it transcends intranet and internet boundaries, so you can actually have services leveraged from internet service providers and use them from your desktop without having to remember multiple credentials. And this is becoming more and more prevalent as we see the expanse of the internet. Transparent use and automatic handling of different types of credentials. For example, you may have passwords, you may have public key and private keys. Automatic handling and rollover of those credentials will be handled by the credential manager. And credential manager is really just a single file that's stored in the user profile, which you can back up it's encrypted, you can back up, you can restore it, and there will be capabilities so that you can actually recover in case you forgot your single password that you remember. Not related to the end user single sign-on experience, but we are also adding digest authentication protocol in the platform, and Active Directory will leverage the digest authentication protocol. Digest authentication protocol is becoming a widespread standard on the internet, and support for that in the Active Directory enables us to put Active Directory as a directory service on the internet and be able to authenticate to it using browser and other kinds of LDAP clients coming over the internet. From the administrator perspective, now if you put the administrator into the end user seat, you will notice that the security of the administrator and the experience of the administrator is equally important. So far I just talked about end users as in real end users, but administrators tend to be equal amount of end users because they log on to the system and they leverage the system. What turns out is that administrator accounts, because they are so privileged, are also the focal point for attack. So protection of those accounts was our second important area of improvement, and we decided that a simplified enablement of the administrator account to do smart card logon in the Whistler timeframe would be a key scenario enabler. So we are doing a lot of work in the space of enabling administrators to just use smart cards to log on. And this involves enabling smart card for administrative operations, an ability to use smart card credentials to mapping a network drive so that you can access network shares, adding smart card support into run as, so that even though you logged on with a lesser privileged account, you can actually run as and start an administrative console using your smart card, which is the administrative credential that you have. There is automatic password management of a strong password under the smart card credential, so that services which are still available only via password authentication, for example, you have NT4 systems out there, then you would still have passwords, but they are strong and they're automatically managed, and you will never have to worry about what the passwords are and how they're managed. We're also enabling smart card credentials for terminal server sessions, and this is for remote administration capabilities. So you can actually use your smart card to start up a remote terminal server session and do administrative tasks that way. Moving on to this, so this was about authentication and the areas we're improving in the authentication space. So let's move on to the data protection, which was the second area that I wanted to talk about. In the data protection area, we are doing a lot of work to find more ways so that you can use encrypted files and make the usage of encrypted files easier and more fitting into your scenarios. So the first thing we're doing, and this is a constant feedback that we've gotten from customers, including a lot of the JDP folks out there, is enabling of sharing of encrypted files. As you might be aware, sharing of encrypted files has been a capability that has existed right from the beginning. However, we did not enable that capability because there were certain usage scenarios which were not working fine because of the applications that deal with files. They do things like create a temporary file and do a rename when doing a save, and those cause encryption metadata to be lost on the modified file. So for these reasons, we did not want to enable sharing because that would have been a very painful user experience. So one of the first thing that we are fixing in Whistler is actually making that a smooth usage scenario. So we are doing the necessary work so that encryption metadata can actually have multiple users on it, as well as that metadata is persisted across modifications of the files, so that you don't get into situations where somebody modified the file and now only they have access to it. So that's one of the key areas. The second area, which also we have received a lot of feedback about, is the client-side cache. So we are encrypting the client-side cache to enable laptops which contain sensitive data in the cache to be actually protected against physical access in the cases of theft and so on. So your business data sitting on laptops, sitting in the client-side cache will be encrypted. We are doing some performance improvements in encrypting file system, and that's just a constant struggle. Whenever you have encryption, you add some cost to the overall file access. So we are constantly trying to improve things in that space. One particular thing that we did in Windows 2000 was caching of the key while you were logged on. And what we identified was that caching of the key was actually being persisted across beyond the logon. So in some cases where you actually wanted to delete your key, the access to the file was not getting lost. So we are fixing some of those things, and those are minor fixes that we are putting. One of the big things we are doing is adding the FIPS compliant algorithm for the encryption of the data. Today, the encryption algorithm is DESX, which is expanded DES. DESX is a 128-bit encryption algorithm. It's a very good encryption algorithm, and it's very high performing because it's almost at the speed of DES. However, it is not FIPS compliant. So for federal space and for our federal customers, one of the things that we are doing is actually adding a FIPS compliant algorithm in the encrypting file system. And the FIPS compliant algorithm is triple DES. So triple DES is definitely more expensive to do encryption because it's 3 rounds of DES, but it is a FIPS compliant algorithm. So in the environments where a FIPS compliant algorithm is absolutely needed, there will be a choice to do that. One area which is more towards, again, the consumer space is simplifying the standalone recovery model. This is probably not something that our JDP customers run into because you typically have domains and your machines are in those domains. So there's domain recovery policy that's getting enforced. But in environments where there are standalone machines, like the home environment, or even in enterprises, sometimes you have standalone machines which are not joined to domains. The standalone recovery policy is a problem area because we create a local recovery policy, which means that if you're able to get to the local administrator account, which is the recovery agent, you can actually decrypt all files on that standalone machine. So we are doing work to actually get rid of this enforcement of recovery policy on a standalone machine, as well as simplifying the recovery management from a user perspective so that they can recover their keys, but not anybody else can do it. One area that we are actually pursuing, but we may not be able to do in Whistler, is the ability to actually have encrypted files on web drives or web folders. And this is my favorite area, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of idea about it. The idea there is that you should be able to store your sensitive data up on, let's say, on an internet site and be sure that that file is secure. So you can actually put sensitive information up on some disk that you've got from a web server or the host services, and you can put sensitive data up there, like your tax return, and be sure that not even the host administrator or the host services administrator can get to your data. But you still have ubiquitous access to that file, irrespective of where you go. So it's enabling a very critical scenario, leveraging the internet. The same scenario with sharing of encrypted files actually enables secure internet collaboration. So you can actually put a sensitive piece of data up on the internet server and then have your friends access to it, but nobody else. And the access is completely transparent. If you take that same scenario and put it in the enterprise, that enables in the enterprise the same capability where you can set up an intranet web folder server and you can share documents and things like that. And be sure that when they're backed up, they're encrypted, nobody else can read them, the backup operator does not have access to that data, and things like that. So this is one of my favorite scenario enablers for the internet as well as the intranet. But we are working towards it. We don't know whether we'll get it in Whistler. We're trying hard, but we'll get that in Blackcomb. So just a tidbit on the long-term vision there. The next area of enhancements that we are doing is security management. This is to simplify the lives of administrators even further with enhancements in the group policy and security configuration area. So we are enabling remote usage of security configuration tools through WMI. If you're aware of WMI, it's a Windows management instrumentation infrastructure which enables remote scriptability and remote management of the managed objects on any given system. So we are integrating our security configuration tools into this management infrastructure, so you can remotely configure systems in terms of the security of those systems. Another area is we are enabling is what we call secure server roles. This is to enable our customer to identify roles of their machines. So my web servers, my file and print servers, my domain controllers, and then run through a wizard of 5 questions and just have the system configure the security of that box with respect to the role that that server is playing. And this is another area that we are leveraging our security configuration technology to ask a few set of questions to understand what the role of that machine is and just blast a configuration to it and configure all the knobs and tweaks that need to be done to secure that box for that particular role. One constant feature that we get back from most of our customers, and then now we've come around to actually adding it, is ability to troubleshoot what access somebody has. We have ACL UI, and it tells you who has what access, but when you run up against a case where a user says, I tried to access the file, and I should have access to the file, but I don't. Can you tell me what access do I have? There is now a feature added to the access control editor where you can actually say a user or group name, and then it will tell you what specific access they have, and you can actually compute that automatically and fix things based on that. We are doing some incremental improvements, not anything significant, in the directory service access management in the Active Directory area. So we are doing some improvements in delegation wizard so that you can actually replay some of the delegation scenarios. You can save templates and then replay them. Ability to reset permissions based on the schema defaults on the OUs and subtrees. Another area in the management space is trust management. This is another area where we've gotten feedback, and we are doing some work to improve security at the trust management. So today the trust model is a full trust model, where when you set up trust, you accept names and security IDs and things like those from the domains that you've set up trust between. So one of the things we're doing in Whistler is actually ability to constrain that trust to specific security IDs or specific areas in which you actually want to trust. So you can actually trust, we call this a concept of quarantine a domain. There might be domains that you don't have under your control, but you have to trust them because there are business practices or your operations require access to those domains. But you don't want to trust the administrators of those domains. So you want to quarantine as to what sort of authorization information those domains can provide you. And that you can go and configure now on the trust objects that you set up to say what SIDs or what names will you accept from those domains. Other things that we're doing is adding high availability offline access for clusters. And we're also looking at ways to enable cross-forest authentication. So enterprises which have multiple forests would like to do authentication across forests. This we understand, we have heard, even during Windows 2000, we heard that feature request. The complexity of it is causing us to not commit to it right now, but we are aggressively looking at ways to do that. Actually, I just came out of that discussion. So we're trying to figure out how to make that happen in the Whistler timeframe, both for Kerberos and NTLM. NTLM because there are going to be NT4 clients which will want to do the same authentication. And this is not direct trust, this is forest to forest trust. So if you set up a root forest to forest trust, you can actually authenticate across any of the domains in those two forests. Another area to ease administration is monitoring. So in terms of security, what we're doing is we're adding a trust monitoring capability. We had a lot of reports and a lot of feedback in terms of trust breaking down, trust going down, especially in the NT4 world. We haven't heard that much in Windows 2000 because we did improve the trust password management algorithm that we had in Windows 2000. So we haven't heard that many reports in Windows 2000 about trusts going down. Yet we believe that because of the built-in latency in the distributed system that we have, there are going to be cases where trust passwords may get out of sync. Therefore, it is important that we have monitoring and self-healing capability built into the system so that these passwords can be resynchronized or they can be fixed up automatically. And this is critical because authentication is entry into the system. And if trusts break, then authentications will stop working for doing pass-through authentication or Kerberos authentication. And that may mean that you don't have email access, or you may not be able to get to a share you need to get to. So trust needs to stay up, and we understand that, and we're doing a lot of work in that space. Another thing that we're doing is in the auditing space, we're adding file I/O auditing. So the way audit works today is that opens are audited for what access. So you may open a file for read and write access, and we audit the open. When you open, you don't necessarily maybe doing read and write, but because applications support both reading and writing, both accesses are audited. So you really don't know what really happened. So one of the things we are doing is adding operation-based auditing, which means the file may be open for whatever access it was open for, but the audits will reflect what actually happened, what operations were actually done. So even though file was open for read and write, and you just did read, you will only see read as the operation that was audited, and you will not see write. And this is very useful for actually figuring out what modifications and who modified and things like those. Auditing is also being added to certificate server and time server and other security sensitive and critical areas, so that you can track problems and you can figure out any penetration that might be happening, especially in the cert server case. And we are doing a lot of plumbing work for auditing. If you may know, auditing was an area that we didn't do any significant work in the Windows 2000. We added auditing for directory service, which was a feature that was added in Windows 2000. But auditing has primarily remained the same. And auditing is an area that now we have actually opened a project so that in Blackcomb timeframe, we will build a high performance and enterprise scalable audit infrastructure. So we're doing a lot of plumbing work to actually enable a really scalable audit infrastructure in the Blackcomb timeframe. And this involves WMI so that you can actually have, register new audit events automatically, have them audited, have applications register new ones, and things like that. So there's a lot of plumbing work going on, and in the future you will see a far more scalable audit infrastructure, which will also, by the way, enable auditor-administrator separation. That's also something that we have heard a lot. We're not doing that in Whistler because that's a significant amount of architecture change, but we're doing plumbing work to enable that in the future. From the developer SKU, so I talked about the 3 axes. So I've talked about end user and I've talked about administrator. So just to give you a little bit about enablement of developer SKU, of how we look at the 3 axes of our customers. So in the developer space, what we're doing is 2 specific things. One is we want to enable developers to build services and build applications and yet keep the system robust and secure. And in order to do that, we want to introduce this notion of least privilege context for services. And the idea there is that you should run your service in the least possible privilege that it needs to run in. We have done some work already in Windows 2000 to enable that through the logo program and other, such as the local system service services running as local system can actually authenticate on the network. So you don't have to have a domain account, you don't have to manage passwords for them and things like that. We are taking that one step further to actually have now 3 different accounts where you don't have to manage passwords. So there's local system, which already exists, there's local service, and there's network service. Services which don't need network access can be run as local service. No password needs to be managed for them, and they will have like a normal user access. So things like bugs in the services, buffer overruns will not cause your system to crash, and any causes in that service, any security problems in that services will not cause the system to get compromised. Network service is another non-privileged service account which doesn't require password management, but it enables network access. So the service running as network service can actually authenticate on the network as that machine, but it is a normal user account. Buffer overruns, penetrations into the service will not cause the service to go down, for the system to go down. Only the service may be impacted. So it's in general area of robustness of the system, which we are enabling for application writers to actually leverage. The other and more interesting area is enabling them to use our authorization or access control model, yet making it more flexible to enable them to do what they want to do. So we are adding things like dynamic group support so that application servers can add their own authorization information when clients authenticate and ask for service. We are adding capabilities such that business rules can be specified. So you can have applications that go and implement and say employees and a first-line manager can approve a purchase order up to $10,000, and they can actually implement that as an authorization rule. And as part of a common access control framework, they can edit the permissions in a common sort of way. They can use a common UI. So that's an area that we are enabling application developers to leverage out of the base platform in terms of authorization services. The real thing there is not so much from the application perspective, but from the administration perspective. What you find today is because there is not a common flexible platform to define the authorization rules or a common administration UI to define these, everybody tends to go off and do on their own. And that creates multiple access models that you have to manage, multiple access models that you have to configure and keep track of. And once we can get applications in the next generation to come together into the same framework, our belief is that administration can be centralized and be configured across multiple applications. So that's really a long-term vision to actually ease administration in the space of access control management. And in the public key space, again, we're doing a lot of work. And a lot of work in the public key space is driven around interoperability. So we are doing work in terms of enabling cross-certification for Bridge CA as well as Entrust interoperability. We realize a lot of customers have existing Entrust deployments and they would like to leverage that. So they'll be doing interoperability work in that space. We are supporting a standardized cert request protocol, the CMC protocol, which is another requirement. We are the certificate server that we have built into the platform is also improving significantly in terms of its administration and management capabilities. We're providing role separation between certificate administrators and certificate operators, people who actually issue certificates, and how you audit them and things like that. So there will be more granular operational roles to do things like those. There are some other things that we're doing, such as Delta curls or Delta certificate revocation lists, so that the revocation information is updated more frequently and it's fresher and it can be used more quickly to do actual revocation when certificates do get revoked. We are adding a key archival and recovery service so that enterprise keys for people can be archived so that if they lose them, they can be given back to them and things like that for ease of use. So finally, this is the last slide. This is not really a feature, as I said earlier. It's really a ratification of our security model, a ratification of all the rich infrastructure that we have built in. And what we're doing is a common criteria evaluation of our Windows 2000 security, as well as we will continue doing that for the Whistler additions that we add to the product. So this is a formal evaluation process. It really enables it's really a government, United States government-driven, as well as now, because of the common criteria, it's actually ratified by all governments, a lot of the governments around the world, to identify secure products. And the common criteria evaluation that we are doing is against an operational profile called CAP, which is equivalent to a C2 level of the Orange Book, if you're familiar with that. And what it really, from an enterprise perspective, it gives you is a ratification that we have, or certification that we have certified our security infrastructure, and it meets the criterions that are needed for a lot of security sensitive federal space requirements. And that requires doing a significant amount of code review of various systems and subsystems. So there's a lot of effort going into actually doing a subsystem design reviews and analysis of our code quality and things like that. We're building a test matrix to enable certification to go through quickly. Just the last slide to give you pointers to places where we have a lot of information. So these pieces of information, a lot of these is about Windows 2000, and they will get updated over time in the same places, and same white papers you can leverage, and you'll get more information about as we build the Whistler product and then start doing Blackcomb planning. Thank you. And questions?
I've got a couple questions.
So the first question is from Toby. So the question is, how are you addressing the issues of supporting road warriors who may lose their keys or passphrases while on the road without leaving a recovery key on the local machine? So I take it that this question is specifically about encrypting file system. So the idea there is that if you're talking of road warriors or like sales consultants that are moving constantly, they have a laptop, but we're presuming that the laptop is actually joined to a domain, in which case the domain recovery policy is in effect, and the data can be recovered by their administrator. If you're talking of the cases where they need to be able to, they lose their key and they need to be able to recover the data while they're on the road, there are capabilities that we are adding, and that's more towards the consumer space, that you can actually make a backup copy of your credentials, your private keys, on a floppy or something, and then use that if you lose your keys. Now, if you're on the road, it becomes a little sensitive as to how you want to carry that, but that capability will be available. The next question is from Laura Gashlin. I hope I got the last name right. So the question is, will there be an Entrust interoperability prior to the release of Whistler? We believe that we have interoperability with Entrust in Windows 2000. The capability that we are adding in Whistler is more around cross certificates. And that is the new way of setting up trust between different public key infrastructures and things like that. So we already support interoperability with Entrust, and there have been a lot of interoperability workshops to make that happen. And there's a white paper out there that you can read about interoperability specifically to Entrust. And this is specifically around cross-certs, and that will be done in Whistler. I'm not aware of it being added before Whistler. Another question from Laura. Are there any plans to support self-token certificates for logon without a smart card? Soft token certificates for logon without a smart card with the encrypting file system to secure the token. So I'm not sure I understand what you mean by soft token certificates. So once, if you're really thinking that it's a password-based authentication, and then the data is actually encrypted with the file, and that has your keys and things like that, we're not trying to use encrypting file system for that specifically because we don't want to get into a cyclic dependency between encrypting file systems, keys also protected by encrypting file system, and that would be a deadlock situation in the system. So we want to keep how your credentials are protected separate from encrypting file system, which is about protecting the data, users' personal data, rather than just credentials. Credentials are separate, and so we don't want to get the cycle there. So next question is from Jim from NEC. The question is, will Whistler support Intel's PAA interface, or will that be for hardware user authentication only? I am not aware of the Intel's PAA interface, so unfortunately I'll not be able to answer that question. But yeah, I can take that question offline and find out what the details of that is. We are in discussions with Intel on some of the hardware support, but that's long term. Another question from Jim. Will VPN be supported in the firewall? Well, the firewall support is there, and VPN support is, firewall support that we are adding is independent of the VPN support. VPN support is already there in terms of being able to do an L2TP setup or doing a PPTP setup back into your corporate wall or between two corporations. So, but we will not break the VPN support when we add the firewall, if that's what your question is, and that is correct. So another question from Jim. What is the maximum throughput degradation for the firewall? I do not have that data. We're still building the product, so hopefully we'll have the data as we get closer to our beta cycle. Let's see if I have. I guess I just have to look at the QA marked question, right? So,
Yep.
right.
Okay, there's no more questions coming in, so you might want to ask for more questions, otherwise we'll bring it to a close.
Any more questions? We have about 5 more minutes, and so if you have any more questions, I'm here. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and we can move on. That's it. Thank you very much. I hope you had a good afternoon or wherever you are. It's in the evening or whatever. Thanks.